Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a strange heaviness in your chest, like you gave away too much of yourself and now you can't take it back? Maybe it was something small, a dream you whispered, a pain you revealed, a moment you let someone see behind the curtain. At the time, it felt honest, maybe even necessary. But now, something feels exposed. Not because you regret your truth, but because it rests in someone else's hands and you're no longer sure they'll treat it with care. We often believe that sharing makes us close, that if we speak our truth, others will understand it, protect it, honor it. But here's the quiet, stoic reality. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. And the more freely you give it, the easier it is to be misread, misjudged, and misunderstood. The soul, Marcus Aurelius reminds us, becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But what happens when you let the wrong hands paint over it? This isn't about fear. It's about discernment. Knowing when to speak and when silence becomes your strongest shield. Because in a world hungry for details they often twist into entertainment or envy, the rarest form of strength is still restraint. So let's sit with this together. Let's explore what happens when you keep your life private, not out of distrust, but out of wisdom. Stay with me. This may change how you protect your peace forever. 1. Don't let them freeze you in time. Have you ever looked someone in the eye, shared your truth, and later wondered if they still see you the same? Maybe it was a story from your lowest point, a mistake, a heartbreak, a season of confusion. You've moved on, grown, but they haven't. Because while you healed, they held on. They stored that moment in their mind like a label, and now, no matter how much you evolve, that version of you is the only one they see. And here lies the danger. People rarely forget what you told them in confidence, especially when it was raw and real. You might outgrow your past, but in their memory, you're still the person who broke down, messed up, or fell short. The Stoics warned us, don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. When you reveal too much, you give others the power to freeze you in time, and most people aren't careful with that kind of power. They don't see you as a soul in motion. They see you as a story they once heard. We live in a world that reacts faster than it reflects, a world that doesn't always consider your depth, your intention, or your silence. And so, when you open your personal life too freely, you open yourself to misjudgment. People don't need the full picture to build an opinion. They'll assemble your identity from fragments and call it the whole. I remember a man who once shared his struggle with addiction in a circle of people he trusted. Years later, sober and stable, he returned to the same room, only to find those eyes still looking at him like a broken version of who he was. No matter how much strength he had built, in their minds, he was still the man who confessed weakness. That is what happens when you offer your soul to people who aren't equipped to hold it. They may not mean harm, but they judge because it's easier than understanding. And in their judgment, you lose not just your privacy, but your presence. This is why your silence matters. Your growth needs darkness, like a seed buried in soil. It needs quiet, space, time, because progress is sacred in its earliest form. And anything sacred must be protected, not exposed. So the next time you feel the urge to share, ask yourself, is this a moment to connect or a test to guard? We'll go deeper into that in the next part. 2. Protect your dreams from small minds. Have you ever shared your dream with someone only to watch their face twist, not in admiration, but in quiet disbelief? Not because the dream was wrong, but because it asked more of their imagination than they were capable of giving, and suddenly, their doubt begins to shape your own thoughts. You start wondering if you've aimed too high, if your path is unrealistic. But the truth is, they weren't seeing your future, they were projecting their own limits. This is why the Stoics taught us to guard our inner life. As Epictetus said, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And often, those judgments don't even belong to us. When you speak too soon, when you share too much, you invite interference. You allow people to speak into places they haven't earned the right to enter. Some will question your direction not because it's flawed, but because they lack the courage to walk it. Others will smile and listen, not to support, but to measure, and to hope you don't go further than they dared. There was a young craftsman I once met who spent 3 years quietly learning to build boats. His dream was to sail one across the ocean, alone. He didn't tell anyone, not because he was afraid, but because he understood the weight of too many voices. Only when the keel touched the water did his village discover what he had done. Some were amazed, some were jealous, but none of them could stop it, because it was already done. That's the strength of building in silence. It denies those with small hearts the chance to contaminate a large vision. Trust, like progress, must be protected. It is not something you give to every friendly face or familiar voice. It must be earned slowly, through loyalty, through consistency, through actions when no one is watching. The warrior doesn't reveal his battle plan at the campfire. He speaks only when the war is over and the victory undeniable. You can be kind without being vulnerable. You can be warm without being exposed. Choose who sees your scars. Choose who hears your dreams, because some people collect your truth not out of care, but out of curiosity. And when you no longer serve their interest, they will turn your story into entertainment. That's not friendship, that's control. So learn to watch not how people act when you're open, but how they behave when they're denied access. The right way to protect your spirit is to reserve it for those who honor silence as much as they honor speech. And in the next part, we'll explore how that silence becomes your strongest shield. 3. Some ears can't handle truth. Have you ever said something from the depths of your soul and immediately wished you could pull the words back? Not because they weren't true, but because the person listening wasn't ready to receive them. That's the risk of being too open too soon. Once your truth leaves your mouth, it cannot be unsaid. And once it reaches the wrong ears, it no longer belongs fully to you. Seneca once warned, "Whatever can be said can be misunderstood." The Stoics understood that speech is not just expression, it's exposure. When you reveal your story, your struggles, your dreams, you are extending a form of trust. And trust, once broken, rarely returns to its original form. It is far easier to guard your peace than to restore it after it's been shattered by someone who never had the strength to honor it. That's why discernment must walk ahead of disclosure. There was once a woman who, in a moment of connection, shared the story of her healing journey with a new friend. She spoke of grief, of strength, of rediscovery. But weeks later, her story was being whispered in circles she'd never walked. Not with malice, perhaps, but with a tone of curiosity she never invited. Her truth had become currency, and the one who had smiled kindly while receiving it had become careless with something sacred. You see, many people cannot handle the weight of your truth, not because it's too much, but because they've never carried anything that deep themselves. When they listen, they filter your words through their own limitations. They don't hear what you're really saying. They hear what threatens them. Your growth reminds them of their complacency. Your resilience disrupts the comfort of their excuses. So instead of meeting your words with understanding, they respond with judgment, dismissal, or silence that stings more than any insult. That's why the warrior walks carefully with his truth. He knows that not every listener is a worthy witness. Some people may be close in proximity, but distant in character. They haven't earned your story just because they're present. The right way to share your truth is to share it slowly with those who have already proven they know how to carry their own. So don't be ashamed of protecting your inner life. Your journey is not a public performance. It is a sacred path. And in the next part, we'll explore how to guard that path without hardening your heart. 4. They'll use your story against you. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes, opened up about your scars, and realized they didn't see the battle, only the wound? They didn't see the nights you wept alone, the inner wars you fought without applause, the silent work of healing you carried with dignity. So when you finally spoke from that place of depth, it felt foreign to them. Not because your words were wrong, but because your truth was too real for someone who had never stood where you've stood. And here lies the danger. When your truth meets shallow ears, it echoes back in distorted forms. If you're not anchored in who you are, their confusion becomes your self-doubt. You begin to shrink, not because you've changed, but because their inability to receive you makes you question whether you should have spoken at all. This is the subtle damage of misplaced vulnerability. It fractures your composure, interrupts your alignment, and tempts you to go silent, not out of strength, but out of fear. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. But what if the injury came wrapped in kindness? A friend, a lover, someone who seemed trustworthy. Many people are not what they appear to be. They listen, not to uplift, but to collect. They nod, not with empathy, but calculation. Your story becomes a token in their pocket to be spent in a moment of conflict or resentment. There was once a man who, during a vulnerable conversation, shared his darkest season with someone he trusted. Months later, after a disagreement, she brought those confessions back like arrows, each word twisted and sharpened to pierce where it once sought comfort. That's the betrayal that silences not just your voice, but your sense of safety. The warrior learns to protect the gates of his inner world, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. He knows that the right way to speak is not with urgency, but with discernment, because truth, once shared with the wrong soul, becomes a weapon, and those who misuse it rarely look like enemies. Often they're cloaked in warmth until you no longer serve their pride. So observe closely. Listen to how they speak about others. If they betray one story, they will betray yours. Privacy then becomes not just a boundary, but a shield. No one can distort what they were never told. And in the next part, we'll explore how this shield becomes your quiet armor in a world addicted to noise. 5. Your silence makes them uncomfortable. Have you ever noticed how quiet strength unsettles those who once fed off your vulnerability? When you stop explaining, stop opening every door into your soul, people begin to fidget, not because they miss you, but because they miss the control. There's something powerful about protecting your space, about keeping your spirit undisturbed by those who haven't earned access to it. And the moment people realize they can no longer extract information from you, their frustration often reveals what their curiosity was truly rooted in. The Stoics believed that mastery begins with self-containment. As Epictetus wrote, silence is safer than speech. And in a world where people twist your words to fit their fears, silence becomes not absence, but authority. The less you share, the more they speculate. And that speculation drives them mad, not out of love, but because your stillness confronts their craving for dominance. When you stop offering updates, your peace becomes a mirror, and most people can't look into that mirror without seeing their own insecurities staring back. I once knew a man who, after years of building quietly, began to glow, his health, his work, his relationships, all blossoming at once. One of his oldest friends began asking questions, offering compliments with edges that cut. "That's great, but are you sure it'll last?" Or, "You seem happy, almost too happy." It wasn't support. It was envy disguised as concern. And within months, this friend began spreading doubts behind closed doors, subtle enough to slip under the radar, sharp enough to wound. That's what envy does when left unexamined. It doesn't always attack directly. Sometimes it waits for a celebration and whispers poison in the applause. This is why you must move like a warrior, not waving your triumphs for the world to weigh, but guarding them until they are unshakable. Because not everyone is clapping for your rise. Some are measuring it. Others are silently hoping it stalls, and the closer someone stands, the more carefully you must watch. If they ask questions with eager eyes but hesitant hearts, take note. If they praise you, but their energy pulls back, pay attention. Jealousy rarely speaks, it studies. The right way to protect what you're building is not through secrecy, but through wisdom. Not every joy must be shared. Not every step must be narrated. Let your growth mature in silence, beyond reach, beyond commentary. In the next part, we'll uncover how your silence not only protects you, but purifies your purpose. 6. Joy shrinks in the wrong company. Have you ever felt your joy start to shrink after sharing it with the wrong person? Not because you weren't proud, but because their reaction made you question whether you should have said anything at all. In that moment, you realize that some people don't envy what you have. They envy how at peace you are with what you've built. And when they can't handle their own discomfort, they try to disturb your stillness. Seneca once said, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." The Stoic path doesn't ask us to hide, it asks us to discern. When you protect your personal world from those who haven't shown they can honor it, you're not being distant. You're being disciplined. Some people can't clap for you without envy leaking through their smile. They see your progress not as inspiration, but as a mirror, reflecting the work they've avoided in their own life. And rather than grow, they try to distract, criticize, or undermine. I once knew a woman who quietly rebuilt herself after years of hardship. New habits, new peace, a new relationship. She didn't post about it. She didn't explain, but one evening she mentioned it casually over coffee to someone she thought was a friend. Within a week, whispers began. Doubts were planted. Her private joy became public speculation. And for what? Because her light disrupted someone else's comfort with their darkness. That's when she stopped sharing, not from fear, but from wisdom. When you live like a warrior, you understand that the right way to protect your growth is not through walls, but through silence. You move quietly. You let mystery guard your purpose. You let stillness mature your strength. And in doing so, you free yourself from the opinions of those who have no authority over your path. Privacy isn't about hiding. It's about mastery. Because once your truth leaves your lips, you lose control over how it's carried. But when you hold it sacred, you preserve the clarity of your direction. You stay rooted in purpose, not performance. Let your stillness speak louder than explanations. Let your boundaries teach others where their access ends. If you've ever felt the weight of overexposure, let this be your reminder. You don't owe the world your process, just your presence. And when you're ready, your results will speak for themselves. Drop a quick respect privacy in the comments. And if you've found strength in this silence, hit subscribe and walk with us on this journey. In the next part, we'll explore how silence can become the final word in your power. 7. Guard your presence like it's sacred. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room and say nothing, yet everyone noticed? Not because they were loud, but because they were unreadable. That kind of quiet presence speaks volumes in a world addicted to noise. There's something magnetic about the person who doesn't overshare. They move with calm precision, not out of secrecy, but out of strength. People sense their depth, but can't quite place it. And that mystery, that restraint, becomes their silent armor. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving." But too often, we let people in based on proximity, not proven integrity. Familiarity fools us into thinking we are safe, when in fact, those who know us best can harm us the most. The deepest wounds aren't inflicted by enemies. They're caused by the hands we once held in trust. A friend who knows your fears. A sibling who's heard your dreams. A partner who's seen your breaking point. And when those private truths are used against you, whether through gossip, envy, or subtle betrayal, the pain lingers far beyond words. I once knew a man who believed loyalty came with time. He confided in someone he'd known for years, spoke freely, trusted deeply. But when envy crept in, that friend began sharing pieces of his story to feel important, to seem closer to the center of attention. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal, just a slow leak. A whisper here, a joke there. But eventually the man's most fragile moments were common conversation in rooms he'd never entered. It wasn't malice, it was carelessness. And it cost him not just his trust in one person, but his openness to everyone. This is why discretion matters. Not because you're bitter, but because you've learned the cost of being too open too soon. Your silence isn't cold, it's disciplined. When you choose to speak with intention, when you reserve your truths for those who've earned them, you reclaim power over your narrative. You stop giving people the tools to misread, distort, or misuse your path. People will judge. They will offer unsolicited opinions, not out of wisdom, but out of projection. They see your healing and feel their own wounds. They hear your dreams and remember their own stagnation. That's not your burden to carry. Your life isn't a performance, it's a path. And in the next part, we'll explore how to protect that path without isolating your spirit. 8. Keep growth private until it's solid. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt more confused than before you spoke, like your clarity was replaced by other people's doubts, judgments, or suggestions you never asked for? That's the danger of exposing too much of your journey to the wrong ears. What should have been sacred becomes scattered, and in that noise, you lose the stillness that once helped you see your path. The Stoics taught that peace begins within. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." It's a reminder that not every step you take needs validation. When your life is private, you get to grow without interruption. You get to fail without performance, reflect without scrutiny, and evolve without applause. Privacy isn't isolation, it's the soil where clarity takes root. There was once a young man rebuilding his life after failure, not loud about it, not boastful, just steady, quiet. He resisted the urge to explain himself to everyone who asked. People speculated, offered opinions, wondered what he was doing, but he didn't answer. Not out of arrogance, but discipline, because he understood that unsolicited opinions dilute the force of one's own reason. Years later, when he returned, not with noise but with quiet results, those same people fell silent. He hadn't argued. He had simply walked the right way, even when no one believed in the path but him. That's the strength of the warrior. Not in how loudly they fight, but in how quietly they persevere. When you protect your personal life, you guard your energy. You reduce the space where interference can enter. You choose not to hand your story to those who haven't earned the right to hold it. Even in relationships, silence can be a form of respect. It prevents misunderstanding, relieves pressure, and creates room for both people to breathe and grow. The world encourages exposure. It praises vulnerability on demand. But the Stoic way honors boundaries. It says, not every thought needs an audience. Not every feeling is meant for sharing. Some truths grow best in solitude, like roots pushing deep beneath the surface before a tree ever shows itself to the world. So, if you feel torn between expressing yourself and protecting your peace, choose the one that keeps your mind clear. And in the next part, we'll reflect on how inner freedom is born from quiet self-rule. 9. Stop handing out sacred pain. Have you ever found yourself pouring your heart out, hoping for relief, only to feel even more exposed, more unsettled, more lost? That quiet moment when you realize you gave someone access to your pain, only to be met with discomfort, judgment, or worse, silence. In that moment, you learn a truth the Stoics knew well. The more you lean on others to carry your burden, the more fragile your inner balance becomes. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Self-reliance isn't about building walls, it's about building roots. When you face life's challenges by anchoring yourself in reason, discipline, and quiet observation, you become less shaken by disappointment, less dependent on outcomes, and more grounded in who you are. You become the one who doesn't panic when things fall apart, not because you don't feel, but because you've trained yourself to endure. A young woman once shared every detail of her heartbreak with a friend she barely knew. At first, it felt comforting, but soon her story became a topic passed around in whispers. The friend meant no harm, but lacked the strength to honor the weight of what was given. That day, the woman realized something deep. Not every soul is equipped to carry the sacred parts of your life. Since then, she chose to become her own shelter. She still loved, still connected, but from a place of sovereignty, not desperation. That's what separates the warrior from the weary. The warrior walks the right way, not loudly, not looking for saviors, but with the quiet conviction that even storms must bow to those who do not flinch. To depend on yourself first is not coldness. It is clarity. It is recognizing that your emotions are your own to govern, your choices your own to stand by. And that true peace comes not from being saved, but from saving yourself again and again. So when you feel tempted to seek comfort in unearned ears, pause, ask, is this person prepared to hold what I'm about to place in their hands? Or am I simply trying to escape the discipline of facing my own reflection? In the next part, we'll explore how boundaries, once forged by silence, become the invisible armor that keeps your soul intact. 10. Too many voices kill clarity. Have you ever watched a simple moment spiral into chaos just because too many people were involved in what never should have been shared? A quiet decision becomes a loud debate. A personal struggle turns into a public spectacle. And suddenly your peace is no longer yours to hold. That's the cost of oversharing. That's what happens when you give the world too much access to what should remain sacred. Seneca once wrote, "Withdraw into yourself as far as you can." And in this age of noise, withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. When you learn to manage your own burdens, your own thoughts, your own turmoil, you take the path of the Stoic warrior, the one who builds internal clarity, not external dependence. Self-reliance isn't about being alone, it's about being rooted. It's the right way to navigate a world where opinions outnumber truths. I once knew a man who used to open up too easily. Every success, every failure, every doubt, he made it public, believing that connection required exposure. But soon, his story was no longer his own. People interpreted, reworded, judged, and gossiped. Even small misunderstandings ignited needless conflict. Eventually he stopped. He began to listen more than speak, to reflect more than explain. And slowly, peace returned. Not because others changed, but because he reclaimed the silence they couldn't weaponize. You see, when you keep your personal life private, you're not hiding. You're guarding the clarity of your thoughts from the contamination of noise. You're filtering out the drama that feeds on partial stories and unearned access. Silence, in this way, becomes a shield. It turns potential storms into passing winds. It protects your relationships from the weight of unnecessary opinions, and it gives your mind the space to see things clearly. Being private also means fewer expectations placed on you by others, fewer assumptions, fewer unsolicited lectures, fewer people projecting their unfulfilled desires onto your choices. You get to live on your own terms, make mistakes in peace, and evolve without an audience grading your every step. So ask yourself, do I want understanding or control? Do I need to be seen, or do I need to be centered? Because the warrior who walks in silence carries fewer wounds and greater power. And now, as we bring this journey to a close, let's return to the truth that began it all. 11. Let gossip die in your silence. Have you ever tried to explain yourself to someone who's already decided what they want to believe? It's like trying to clear muddy water by stirring it. It only clouds things further. That's what happens when your private life becomes a topic for public discussion. The more people know, the more they assume, and the further you drift from peace. Epictetus once said, "Keep silence for the most part, or speak only what is necessary and in few words." Not because you're hiding, but because unnecessary words often create unnecessary fires. The less you share, the fewer misunderstandings take root. You don't need to explain every decision or justify every emotion, especially not to those who thrive on chaos more than clarity. The Stoic path doesn't chase reputation, it guards the soul. And one way to do that is by keeping what's sacred, sacred. I once knew a woman who shared her life freely, her joys, her doubts, her hardships. At first, it felt freeing, but soon, whispers turned into stories. Stories turned into judgments. What began as honest connection became a courtroom of casual opinions. She wasn't battling her problems anymore. She was battling how others misunderstood her story. So, she stopped. She drew her circle tighter, chose her silence with intention, and found a peace gossip couldn't touch. Privacy is not about isolation. It's about conserving energy. Drama is the enemy of direction. It distracts, divides, and drains. When you're caught up clarifying misinterpretations or defending your choices, you lose focus on what truly matters: your path, your purpose, your growth. Protecting your privacy keeps that focus intact. It's the right way to stay grounded when the world tries to pull you into its noise. Moreover, boundaries speak without shouting. When you don't overshare, you subtly teach others how to treat you. You show that you're not available for drama, that your life isn't a spectacle. And people begin to respect that. They hesitate before crossing lines. They learn that your silence is not absence, it's discernment. In this age where even thoughts are broadcasted, restraint becomes revolutionary. The warrior who knows what not to say often wins the battles no one sees. When your life is no longer open for interpretation, you walk lighter, think clearer, and move freer. And that freedom, that quiet space untouched by opinion, is the ground where your real strength begins to grow. Let's explore how to preserve it. especially when the world keeps demanding more of you. 12. Walk quietly, build deeply, become whole. Have you ever sat with your own thoughts and felt, perhaps for the first time, that your inner voice had been drowned out by too many opinions, too many judgments, too much noise from a world that never stops watching? There's a clarity that only emerges in solitude. And it is in that space, free from performance, free from projection, that you begin to truly understand yourself. Seneca once said, "Withdraw into yourself as far as you can." Privacy is not avoidance. It is the foundation of strength, clarity, and self-possession. When you keep your personal life guarded, not out of fear, but from wisdom, you preserve a sacred space where your growth can take root without being distorted by outside interference. You are not hiding. You are choosing the right way to build something that matters, something stable, something that reflects who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. Imagine a man walking through the storm of his own transformation. He has goals he's yet to speak, wounds he hasn't yet shown, and lessons he's still trying to digest. If he shares too soon, too loudly, he risks distraction, judgment, or worse, being misunderstood before his clarity fully matures. So instead, he walks quietly. Not because he's uncertain, but because he knows the process of becoming demands reverence, not display. And in that quiet, he finds freedom. Privacy is what allows you to hear yourself think. It sharpens your awareness. You begin to see the patterns in how you respond, what triggers you, what brings you peace. Without the white noise of outside opinion, you gain the discipline to discern which emotions are truly yours and which were planted by others. This is how you develop inner resilience. You no longer react impulsively to criticism or seek applause for validation. You move with conviction because your actions come from principle, not pressure. With that foundation, your relationships evolve too. You don't need to overshare to feel close. You listen more. You choose your words carefully. And because you've made peace within, you no longer demand others to fix you. That's emotional strength, the kind that doesn't need permission to be whole, the kind that a warrior carries quietly. Privacy also helps you set boundaries that teach others how to treat you, not by force, but by example. When you don't overshare, people learn to respect your space. When you don't explain every decision, they understand your silence is intentional. These boundaries protect your energy from being drained and your values from being diluted. They create room for sincere connection, built not on exposure, but on mutual respect. And perhaps most importantly, privacy grants you the grace to fail in peace. You can try, stumble, and reorient without needing to justify yourself. You grow for growth's sake, not for spectators. You make adjustments quietly and find courage in the absence of commentary. That space where failure isn't shameful, just necessary, is where real character is formed. So let them wonder, let them assume. Your life does not owe them a running commentary. It's not a broadcast, it's a journey. And the deeper you go within, the more unshakable your peace becomes. In a world addicted to exposure, choose restraint. Not because you're afraid, but because you're finally walking the path inward, the only path that truly leads home. Let silence be your strategy, not your fear. Protect what's sacred, build quietly, heal deeply, type "stay private" below, and if this spoke to you, walk with us for what's next.